Hey everyone, this is Sandeep and welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to learn about React test driven development. We are going to get started. We are going to take a quick getting started guide I'm going to share with you. So what are we going to learn today? So I'm going to go back to my screen and I have some notes created. So we are going to write an application that's a really simple application, a counter application, where and this is really simple application and we are going to follow test driven development in React to create this application. So I'm going to have this counter and these two buttons, increment and decrement. And I'm going to cover some of the topics while creating that application. So we're going to get started with the setup. We are going to set up the environment, the React project, and then we'll learn about Enzyme and Enzyme adapter. So Enzyme is a testing library which we're going to use. We're going to set up Enzyme. We are going to write our first test case, and then we are going to write some application related test cases. So without further ado, let's jump into the setup, and we'll get started. So I'm going to open a terminal. So inside terminal, I have already created a folder called React testing, and inside that I'm going to create a new React project. So you're going to use npx create React app command, and then you're going to give the name of the project. So I'm going to give the name of the project as you know quick React testing, something like this. And you just press enter, and you need to wait for some time while React is creating this project behind the scene. So I'm going to fast forward my video here, and we can we'll start writing some code, start writing some test driven development in React. So if everything goes well with your npx create React app command, you're going to see this screen and you'll see some of the commands which you need to run. So I'm quickly jumped into my project folder which I have created. So I've created a project called React quick React testings. I need to cd into folder. I think I went to the wrong folder actually. I need to go back to my terminal and let me go back to my folder where I have created the project. So I have my React, inside that React testing, quick React testing. Okay. So I'm going to open this. Hold up. I'm going to open this in a terminal and a folder. Okay. And now I am into the folder. I can run npm start, and this is going to run my application. But we are not interested in running the application. We are interested in test-driven development. So let's get started with test-driven development in React. So we have our project set up. Now let's install Enzyme. So I'm going to use Enzyme. So if you search for Enzyme testing, and if you click on this first link, so Enzyme is a JavaScript testing utility for React that makes it easier to test your React components output. You can also manipulate, traverse, and in some way simulate a runtime given the output. So you can check more about Enzyme here. So I'm going to quickly jump into Enzyme and let's see how we can install Enzyme. And we will need one more thing here called Enzyme adapter. So I'm going to use Enzyme adapter also. So you search for the Enzyme adapter on Google, and you need to search for Enzyme Adapter React 17. You're going to get this link, okay? Or you can click on this Stack Overflow link. So we are going to use this. So we need to basically import Enzyme and Enzyme Adapter React version 16. So let's install it. So I need to close my application basically, and I'm going to npm install Enzyme. Obviously we need to install Enzyme, and this is a long name, so I'm going to just copy and paste. So we are going to use 17, so I'm just going to copy because the official 17 version of Enzyme adapter is not available yet, so I'm going to use this one. So you just need to copy and paste, follow along, and I'm going to say save dev, and I'm going to press enter. So let's wait I think this should be quick. The enzyme is going to install quickly. And there you go. Yes. So now I can start my application. And basically, I'm not interested in looking at the application. We will see the final output. And one more thing I'm going to use inside this, I'm going to use semantic UI. So I'm going to search for semantic UI CSS and I'm going to include it from the CD and JS. So you just need to copy this CSS from here. And first of all, I need to open my project inside Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to open Visual Studio Code and open my current folder, the project folder, which is inside this one, and this one. I'm going to open it and we're interested in apps. I'm just going to make it a bit bigger. So this looks better, I would say. Maybe this looks better. So I'm not interested in this app.css. I'm just going to do some cleanup. I don't need this header. And let me close this one also. So I'm going to save and we are going to import React here. React from React. Okay, so I was talking about that CSS. I'm going to include that CSS just here. I need to write the tag, basically the link tag, and rel will be sheet, and I'm going to use href, which will be that link which I have copied. Good. So we are using this semantic UI just to make our application look beautiful because I don't want to write a lot of CSS here. So close that. Now we'll start with our test-driven development. So I'm going to use this app test for writing all my test cases. So we'll start with app, whether app is there, whether the app has been rendered into the application or not. But before doing that, the first step we need to take is we need to set up Enzyme. So let's set up Enzyme quickly. So I'm going to go back to my code and I'm going to open my app.test and I'm going to set up Enzyme. So obviously I don't need this testing library. So I'm going to remove it, import. I'm going to import Enzyme and from Enzyme. Also, I need to import that adapter from, and that's a long name of adapter. So I'm going to take help of my Stack Overflow link where, I'm going to copy this one and I'm going to paste it here. So this is the adapter I'm going to use. So let's do a setup. So to do the setup, we need to use enzyme.configure function of enzyme. And inside this, I'm going to configure my adapter, which is new adapter. So this is the only step you need to configure your enzyme. Now enzyme has been configured. Now we are good to write our test cases or good to follow the test driven development. So I'm going to start from scratch. So let's write our first test where we are going to check whether the app component has been rendered or not. So before doing that, I'm going to open another terminal window for my React testing project, this one. So new terminal at folder, and I'm going to write npm test. This is going to run my test. And now if you look at it, your test suite must contain at least one test. So obviously we don't have any test written. So I'm going to write my first test where I'm going to check render application. So I'm just checking whether my application has been rendered or not. And this is the arrow function which I'm going to use for writing my test. And I'm checking whether the application has been rendered or not. So if I save now, you see that the test is passing. But actually, I haven't written any expectation here. So So if you go back into the documentation of Enzyme, we are going to use shallow rendering. So there are different ways of rendering, you can check the API reference shallow rendering. Then there is if I scroll down, there is full DOM rendering, and there is other types of rendering given here. So I'm going to use shallow rendering. This is quick and easy way to write our test driven development code. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to just import that shallow function, which I'm going to use to render my component for a testing purpose. So shallow, and I'm going to shallow render my app. So I'm going to say app is equals to shallow app. So this is going to shallow render the app in the terminal, I would say, because in the terminal, I don't have access to DOM. So this is a way to render that particular DOM into terminal using the shallow function. Now, next, I have the app rendered. I'm going to check whether that app exists or not. Okay, so this is just a rendering of the app. So I'm going to check for the app component. So I'm going to give it a name of wrapper actually. So this is my application wrapper. Now I'm going to check for the app component. So I'm just going to say app is equals to, I'm going to find my app component wrapper.find. So these are all the functions, which are mentioned inside this. So I'm using this find function to find the selector. So you can find with the class selector, we can find with ID selector, but I'm going to use the data test selector. That's a good idea because, these IDs, these class names are subject to change. So it's a good idea to have a data test elements. So I'm going to use my data test attribute where I'm going to check for app. Okay, so I'm just checking for the app and I'm just finding app. So what I'm doing actually wrapper. So inside my app, I'm trying to find whether I have app component or not. And once I have the app, I'm going to write the expectation where I'm going to check if app.length to be 1. So I'm just checking for the length, whether that app component exists or not. So now if I save and if I go back, you see that a test is failing because I don't have the app component. I have the app component basically, but my app is not configured with the data test attributes. I'm going to go back to my app and I'm just going to write data test is equals to app. Now I'm going to put app here. If I save, if I go back, voila, our first test is passing, right? First passing test. So I think this is time for a celebration, right? Our first, and you can see the application is getting rendered now. So let's continue and write more test cases related to our application. So if I go back to my markups, you see here right on the top, we need to create this application, right? And this is what it is running here. It's only showing the app here. So we need this counter, right? Counter is at 0 label. We need the increment, we need the decrement button, right? This is all we need. So let's quickly start writing the test related to our application. Okay, so first we'll start with this component. So we'll check whether the counter is rendered or not. Then we will check for the button, increment button and decrement button. So I'm going to quickly go back to my app.test and I'm going to write a new render test where I'm going to check renders. Here I'm going to put as renders in renders the counter display basically. So I'm just going to check whether the counter display has been rendered. And obviously we are going to write a function, put semicolon. And here again, I need my wrapper. So I'm going to write my wrapper and I'm going to shallow render my app. So this is more of, copy paste. We need to write this code most of the time. So just to build that muscle memory, I'm writing this. And obviously we need to find, this time I'm going to find a counter, right? I need to find a counter. And how I'm going to find the counter, I'm going to use the wrapper.find function. And inside that find function, I'm going to use my data test is equals to I'm going to check for the counter component. And I'm expecting that the length of the counter to be 1. So let me check like if it is to be 1. If I save, and obviously we are following that pattern, where we write the failing test first. So you can see like renders counter display is not passing. So obviously we need to create the counter component. So I'm going to create the counter component now. So let's go back to app, and instead of app, I'm going to add a div with the data dash test is equals to counter. So and I'm going to write counter is at 0. So this is my counter component. I've created my counter component. And if I save now and go back to my test, you see renders counter display. Let's continue and create the other components, right? So let's write the test first. So I'll go back to my mockups. Where are my mockups? Okay, here. I need to write a test case for the increment button and decrement button. So let's write that. So next I'm going to check renders, or sorry, I need to write a test basically. And inside that test, I'm going to check renders increment button. And I'm going to put my arrow function. And this time, I'm just going to copy and paste this part just to make it faster, I'm just going to copy and paste. So we need a wrapper, we need app, and I'm going to pass. This time I'm going to find data test with increment. Okay. And again, obviously we need to expect. So I'm going to write it down. That's a good idea. Expect the counter dot length to be 1. And if I save, go back to my test, see that increment but increment button is basically increment button doesn't exist. It doesn't render the increment button, right? So I need to create my button basically. So I'm going to use semantic UI here. So I'm going to search for the semantic UI, and I need that button, right? So I need my buttons. I'm going to go back to my button code here, and I'm going to render. I'm going to find a good button for my code. So I'm going to use this button, this primary button. So I'm just going to copy this code from here, and I'm going to paste it here. And we need to change this class to class name. Just remember that. And I'm going to use my and just change the label to increment. And we are going to use data test of increment. Okay. Now if I save and go back to my test, see that renders increment button. Let's quickly write a test about our decrement button also. So I'm just going to write a new test, which is going to check for the renders, decrement button. This will be my arrow function. And inside this, again, I'm going to copy and paste this one. So just copy and paste wrapper. I have my app. I'm going to find, this time I'm going to find for the decrement button. Save. And I'm going to expect the length. And this is not a counter, right? So I need to change this to this counter to increment. So this is the problem with, copy paste. I always forgot to write component name. I change, so this will be decrement. Okay, so I'm going to check whether decrement dot length to be 1. And now if I save, go back to my test, we have a failing test, renders increment button. Now I need, I'm checking for increment decrement button. I don't know why it is saying, okay, renders increment button is not passing. What happened? Okay, I need to change this from this again, copy paste. So increment button is rendering, right? So renders decrement button. So decrement dot length. So obviously I need to create that button. I'm just going to copy and paste this button from here. So let's have some code formatting here. So I need this button here. So I'm going to copy and paste here. And I just need to change this to decrement. Decrement. I need to be aware of my typos. And I'm going to change this primary to secondary. Save. Now, if I go back to my test, we have 4 passing tests. So, I mean, I think we covered from the render part. So we basically check for the rendering of different components. So this is how actually you write test cases for your components rendering, right? So you're checking whether the particular component has been rendered into the DOM or not. So this is how we write testing related to rendering, related to our component display. So this is a pattern we usually follow. We have 4 passing tests and we have our application ready. I can say counter is at 0, increment, decrement, and you can see that, right? We have all those things here, that increment button, and I need to change the label again. This is copy paste bug. So I just need to change to this to decrement. Oh, I need to select decrement. Okay, and somehow I'm not seeing the my semantic UI library working here. So I have inside this index.html. Okay, so I'm going to save this one. I'll go back. Now I can see. Cool. So our application is ready. Our rendering related test cases are written. Let's move on and write some behavioral test. So we have behaviors in our application and we write test for the behaviors in our application. So when I'm going to click on increment, this counter should increment. When I click on decrement, this counter should decrement, right? And initially the value should be 0. So let's write some behavior driven test cases in the next part of the video. Okay, so let's continue and write some behavioral tests. So obviously when I'm going to click on this, okay, so I'm going to write the first behavior test related to my counter. So I need to make my application a little bit big. So initially, this counter should be at 0 and this is a behavior of the application. So obviously we should have some test related to this behavior. So counter should start at 0. That could be a very good test case, I can say. So let's start by writing that test. So I'm going to again write my test and where I'm going to check if counter should start at 0, right? And need to write my arrow function. And here again, I'll need all of these things, right? So obviously I need a counter here. So I'm going to copy and paste this part. And okay, so I need the count actually, not the counter. So I'm going to target the count element and that count element I'm going to create inside my the 0. I'm going to wrap this 0 with the span element and I'm going to give a data ID, data test of count to this element. And you can write render for this particular element, but I mean the span element, the render test cases, but I don't think so. I need that. I already have a render for count and count is going to have this span, right? So let's save. I'm going to target this count. So if I go back, now I'm going to target the count here. And now I'm going to check expect count. So I'm taking my element count. And this time I'm going to check for the text attribute. So count dot text. Okay, so I'm checking for my count. This is my element dot text attribute and that text to be 0. This is what I'm checking. Okay, so I'm going to save and if I go back to my test, see that counter should start at 0, but expected 0 but received 0. So this is more of number and string related comparison happening here. I just need to change this to a string and this should work fine. I'm going to save and now if I go back, voila, all the tests are passing. Counter should start at 0 is passing. Let's move on and write another behavioral test for clicking on increment button. So I'm going to write test increment counter. I'm just going to name it very simple increment counter, and I can write more, I can be more specific, clicking of increment button should increment the counter. So clicking increment should increment counter, clicking increment button, something like this. Should increment a counter, or I'll go simple here, should increment counter, okay, something like this. And again, I need to target my increment button for that. So I'm going to just copy and paste this one from here and paste it here. So I have my wrapper, I have my increment element, and I'm just going to say increment dot simulate. And now this is a function to trigger the events. So I'm going to simulate a click event that will automatically, like it's automatically happening, someone or this enzyme is going into the, or this test is going into the application and clicking on that button. So this is automatic behavior. So this is going to click the increment button, and then I'm going to grab again my count. So I need a count, and because I need to check that count, okay, and I'm going to expect, so I'm checking whether count dot text. So now I'm checking because I have simulated the click behavior on the increment button. Then I went into the DOM and I have grabbed my count element, and I'm checking whether the count dot text to be one and string, because initially the value of my count will be 0. And if I simulate this click, it should be 1. So I'm going to save. And if I go back, we have a failing test. That's good, actually. Should increment counter. So it's getting expected 1, but we are getting 0. So obviously, because I haven't written a code for that, right? So I need to write a code for that. So I'm going to use my use state, because the count is the state of my application. And I'm going to create some state values here. So count, and I'm going to write set count. And initially, I'm going to keep my state value as 0. And let's put that state here, count. So initially, I'm going to see 0. And now I'm going to write my behavior like on click. So when I'm going to click on my increment button, right, it should it should change my count value. So I'm going to call set count, and I'm going to increment the value of count by 1. See that? It's really simple. So when I'm going to click on increment button, it's going to increment my count by 1. So initially the value will be 0. If I click, and that I have simulated that click behavior inside my test, right? By using the simulate function. Now, if I go back, we have a passing test for should increment counter. Now let's write on the similar line another test case for decrementing the counter, right? So should decrement counter. So this is probably the last test case. And this time I need my decrement button. So obviously I'm going to get my decrement button from here. I'm going to put it here. Again, obviously I need to use decrement dot simulate. So I'm going to simulate my click behavior on the decrement button. And this time, again, I'm going to grab the count. Obviously, I need count. So I'm going to grab it and paste it here. And then we are finally going to check for the expect count dot text. Now this time it should be what? It should be -1, because we're starting at 0, right? And if I click on decrement button, if I simulate that click behavior, it should be -1, right? So now if I save and if I go back to my test, should decrement counter is failing because we received 0, because I haven't written code for that. This is good. Writing test, writing code. So first red, green, red. That's the approach we are following. And I just need to write my on click here on my decrement button. And I'm going to write set count. And this time I'm going to decrement my count. And now if I save and go back, all the test cases are passing, right? So we have written 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tests, and we have written test first and then we have written the code. And this is really good idea, to write your test first and then write your code, right? So let's go back to, so we were writing only test. We were not checking like how our application is working. We didn't go into the application. So let's refresh it and see how it is working. Decrement -1 increment. See that? Application is working perfectly fine. And we have test cases. We have used test driven development. We have used enzyme, we have used shallow, we have used adapter, we have written 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I mean this is a really good start. This is really great start, I would say, into the world of test driven development in React. So I'm going to stop here. I think we are done with this video. We have our application, we have our counter application working with test. So why not? So go ahead and try some other application, where you can write your own test cases. So if you find this video useful, this is just a getting started, just a quick start guide about getting started with React test driven development. If you want to see more detailed video, if you want me to create more like a long video, a course video on React test driven development, you just let me know in the comment box and I'm going to come back with more detailed video in React test driven development. So with that, I think if you like this video, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, hit that bell button so you'll get the notification about my new video. And I'm going to see you in the next video with a new topic. Till then, take care and bye bye.